Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Miska, Executive Director of First Amendment Voice. Are you concerned about the state of civil discourse in our country or maybe even in your own community? If you want to help FAV bring programming like the discussion you're getting ready to watch to others, please consider going to our website at firstamendmentvoice.org and click on the Join tab. You can learn about the benefits of membership and become a part of a movement reinvigorating and understanding about freedoms of speech, religion, the press, assembly, and petition. And if you like our videos, feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's First Amendment Voice, all one word, .org, O-R-G. Thank you, and enjoy the webinar.
Okay, everyone. Hello. Welcome to our event. You are joining us for First Amendment Voice's keynote conversation on religious freedom enacted. And today our panel is called the Faith-Based Innovations in Columbus and Serving Children in Times of Need. We are joined today by two men who have launched a very innovative program, which we will shortly have time to hear more about. I'm going to briefly introduce Gerald Murphy and Nick Nye, and then turn it over to them to let them tell you about this exciting innovation in living out religious freedom proactively through service. Gerald Murphy is currently serving in two overlapping roles. One is the Director of Community Development with Catalyst for Columbus, and the other is pastor of the Columbus Dream Center. Gerald received his master's degree in Christian history and theology from Ashland Theological Seminary, and he serves in both of these roles with a passion for unity in the body of Christ and to see every believer walk in the fullness of their identity and vocation of God's kingdom. We are also joined today by Nick Nye. Nick has served as a church planner, a church revitalizer. He leads the city initiatives work with Catalyst for Columbus. He served as a multi-site lead pastor, nonprofit founder, church planting network board member, speaker, leadership coach. Both of these folks are currently based in Columbus and are working together to lead an effort that has helped launch over 80 learning extension centers for children in Columbus whose schools are currently in online learning mode without any in-person instruction. So I am going to kick us off with a question to both Gerald and Nick. Can you both just briefly introduce yourselves in probably a more succinct way than I've been able to, specifically with respect to your organizations and roles and the work you're doing right now collaboratively in this area of serving Columbus City school children? Gerald, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Thank you, Chelsea, and thank you for having us. So I've been in the Columbus area since I was 7 years old and started working in the community, specifically in ministry around the age of 21. And so I've served in various capacities throughout the last 10 years. And more recently, in the last year, I've had the privilege of joining the Catalyst team, which is really focused on and motivated by seeing revival come to our city, primarily through connecting church leaders, nonprofit leaders, and faith-based marketplace leaders towards the vision of peace and prosperity for our city. And so there's a lot of initiatives that we have the privilege to help lead and steward. And when the opportunity to really become an equiper and mobilizer toward the LEC initiative came to the table, it was a no-brainer for our organization. And so really, it's just been a joy to see how the church overall has responded, how the Columbus City School leadership and other leaders in the community have welcomed our strategy and solution with open arms and given relational support really from day one to see this come about. And we're hoping that it's creating an infrastructure for more sustainable and long-term impact toward.
Apologies, joys of webinars. It looks like we briefly lost Gerald. Nick, I wonder if we could transition to you and maybe briefly you could introduce yourself and your role with Catalyst and work in this area of these learning extension centers, and we'll work on getting Gerald back.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love technology in this way. I feel like no matter how good things go, it's just there's always these hiccups. But I'm really thankful to be here. I have served in Columbus for a long time. My mom and dad both worked here, and so my heart's always been for the city. And but I moved back here in 2007 to start a church and to be really a congregation that really engages the downtown area in its fullness, and being able to reach artists and marketplace leaders and young professionals working in the community. And so through that, there became a real passion and desire to see a whole ecosystem at work together. So how does as Gerald said, how does the marketplace, how do congregations, how do nonprofits all start working together in parallel? And so when the opportunity came to step into that as a sort of full-time work with Catalyst, there was this opportunity to cultivate that holistic ecosystem and really put pieces together. And so this Learning Extension Center really became a cornerstone project for us to link together the strategies that the marketplace can bring in partnership with our schools and our teachers and our students. I mean, these are our kids. They're and so for us, this is not just a far off thing. This is our neighbors and our friends, and so we really are excited to see this flourish.
Great, thank you, Nick and Gerald. So I'm going to start with a really basic question that I realize we kind of fully launched into. Nick or Gerald, can you just tell us briefly, what is a Learning Extension Center and how did this come about through For Columbus Kids? Maybe starting with the conversations you all had this summer with the Columbus City Public Schools as they were announcing that they would not be returning for in-person learning this fall.
Yeah, maybe I'll throw out a little bit of the history and Gerald can pick it up from there. It was great to see that there was a lot of work done before this of just cultivating unity amongst churches and amongst city leaders and such that had been going on for a really long time. And for me, even seeing some emails about this with one of the old principals that I spent a lot of time with, it just reminded me of the long years of cultivating relationship and friendship between faith leaders and the Columbus City Schools. And so this really started was some pastors and ministry leaders out on the west side of Columbus who are in a really, really poor community. And I mean, it's a really difficult, one of the I think hardest schools that's struggling just to keep going. And these pastors and these leaders, essentially right when the email went out from Columbus City Schools saying they were not going to do in-person learning, within hours there was an email chain going of saying, hey, our buildings are empty right now. We're not having services on Sunday. Can we somehow utilize them? We've got Wi-Fi. We've got people that would be willing to make some sandwiches, and you know, we would even put money into buying some computers and setting up a little computer lab, anything. What do you think? And so this kind of idea started really stirring. And kind of within that conversation was one of the other leaders from the Columbus Dream Center, which Gerald helps give oversight to. And so that kind of brought in that partnership with the Columbus Dream Center, and sort of snowballed from there into creating the Learning Extension Centers. And Gerald's been working on the nuts and bolts and really the staple of what it actually is.
Yeah, it's been really incredible just to see the synergy and the unity that really was happening without a lot of us even knowing. And so while that conversation was happening on the west side, the leadership of the Columbus Dream Center and Rock City Church simultaneously was having conversations. And then Nick really helped bring the Dream Center leadership to the table of what was happening on the west side. And so through the Dream Center, we were able to put together a plan pretty quickly that covered really the most essential and foundational elements of what it would take to start a learning extension center. And shortly after that, Nick and I decided to share that information across the city with about 120 leaders. And it's really been an incredible snowball effect ever since. But essentially, a learning extension center is a safe space for students to come where they are guaranteed to have internet access, a meal, and tutoring educational support that allows them to really engage with the online learning platforms that Columbus City Schools is providing. And that's been one of the most important things in all of this is these learning extension centers do not replace the need of teachers, do not replace the curriculum or education that's being provided by Columbus City Schools, but it's really coming alongside of and supporting not just the students and their families, but the teachers and the leaders of the school district. And that's been one, again, the most encouraging aspects of this is that true collaboration with the school district. And so whether an organization or church has a capacity for 5 kids 1 day a week, or whether they have capacity for 50 kids 5 days a week, we created a model and a plan that anyone could take and immediately adapt to their capacity and to the resources that they have available to them, and hit the ground running and serve as many kids as they can.
So thank you for sharing that, Gerald and Nick. So I would love for you to just share with our participants, when Columbus Schools announced that they would be closing, what previous relationships did you all already have that helped you build inroads with Columbus Schools? And what did that first meeting or couple meetings look like for you to all figure out what were the needs of the community that you were trying to serve? And then what did you have to do to go back to work with the churches to try to meet those needs? Gerald, maybe you want to start.
Yeah, sure. So I know that Columbus City Schools have always been very intentional about engaging community partners throughout the year. And so specifically from the Columbus Dream Center's perspective, we had already had after-school programs in Columbus City Schools. We had already been working in tandem with Columbus City Schools in a lot of the parks and rec centers here in the city. And also through Rock City Church, which is the church that oversees the Columbus Dream Center, there had been years of establishing relationships through back to school events, giving backpacks and school supplies away to the students, giving shoes away during the Christmas season, and also throughout the year celebrating and honoring the teachers. With a partnership with Chick-fil-A, every single Columbus City school teacher was receiving a meal, was receiving just a goodie bag, just a little token of appreciation. And those things had been taking place really over the last 7+ years. And so with the Dream Center, as soon as this crisis hit, we were able to respond. As of recent, we have been in about 15 neighborhoods serving meals 5 days a week, where most of the kids that we're serving are in Columbus City School District. And so that relationship had been there through March. And when we finally had the opportunity to move forward with the LECs, we were already positioned within just those 15 neighborhoods to know exactly the families, the students that we'd be able to engage. And so when we got the green light, it was pretty simple to take it back to the churches, take it back to the faith leaders, and just essentially ask them to jump on board and give them the game plan. And all that we needed from them was a building with internet. And we were able to provide the rest and see this multiply pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think
one of our speakers also just mentioned, and maybe Nick, you can talk about it a little bit, the types of long-term partnerships you may have already have, including the tutoring center, which operated for many years before this current moment that kind of, got opening those doors and paving trust and paths forward.
Yeah, I mean, what's fascinating is that there's always been a ton of unique works going on all around the city, from from various tutoring initiatives that were organized and structured and engaging in various parts of the city, to churches particularly opening their doors. And I mean, I've learned a lot about a lot of the work that's been going on, even that's sort of been unknown, that has really laid the groundwork for us to be able to just help add another brick to the wall in this. And so I think it's been really fascinating to see the churches and hear the stories of their years of serving teachers, and being involved in parent-teacher associations, and just really being engaged in the local schools, that I think made it really easy for the Columbus City School leadership to trust congregations, trust us not to there's always fear, but trust us to be able to continue helping and coming alongside of, and not really subverting what work they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you guys for sharing that. I want to ask a really pragmatic question. How practically have you all been able to help provide resources to over 80 now churches who, as sorry about that. I quickly muted myself because I heard my child crying in the background for my husband. So I apologize. This is real life, folks. And we know that God shows up in these moments. So please just give me a little grace. But practically, you guys have served 80 churches. And we know all of these churches are operating in different areas, and they all just need internet, but we know they're providing safe environments for children with trained volunteers, in coordination with various partners throughout the city, and everything from mental health to biblical curriculum to food. So can you just talk about how you've brought all those together, and maybe some of those elements that I've just mentioned in terms of the nutritional well-being, spiritual well-being, mental health well-being of these children?
Yeah, so kind of related to the previous question, a lot of these relationships and partnerships already existed. From Catalyst perspective, one of the joys that we have, as Nick mentioned, is just really bringing a lot of these already existing partnerships and collaborations to light. And so kind of looking at some of the things that you mentioned, especially with the gospel-centered curriculum, you have organizations like Youth for Christ, you have organizations like Young Life, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, who have already made themselves so available to the schools and to the leaders of Columbus City School District. And so being able to lean on them and really leverage the relationships that they've already built and that they've already solidified has been huge. When it comes to food, Children's Hunger Alliance is an organization that has been providing meals to programs across the city, specifically within the inner city and Columbus City schools, for a really long time, making it extremely accessible and extremely easy for organizations to benefit from their resources. When you think about the counseling and mental health, the Village Network is one of the counseling agencies that we've been able to work with, that typically is in the schools during the fall, that even help churches get set up with after-school programs with schools. And so when they found out that the schools wouldn't be open, they came to us and immediately offered themselves to be volunteers, to be on call, to be able to engage when their services were needed. So it's really been the fruit of very meaningful, very intentional relationships, partnerships, and collaboration that have been going on for a long time, and we're ready to really be leveraged when this crisis hit.
Thank you. And I want to mention very briefly, we would welcome and invite you all to type in your questions as you have them now. We'll very briefly here transition to participant questions. So if you have questions for our participants about what these partnerships look like in practice, the types of resources and convening that Catalyst and Dream Center are bringing to the table, how you might be able to launch this at your own church, please type those in for Gerald and Nick in the chat section. And we do have additional resources that we can share beyond today. As we may have mentioned in a blog post, this session is being recorded and it will be shared afterward as well. As we wait for those questions, I'm going to just go ahead and ask some of my questions. One of the things that I'm really struck by is you guys' ability to balance that you're serving children who are not all Christian with your strong desire to live out and spread the gospel through these programs. And some of these programs have at least unofficial partnerships with the public schools. So how are you balancing and living into your Christian mission while making these partnerships across entities that don't always have an explicitly faith-based mission themselves?
It's a great question, Nick. You want to tackle that one first?
Yeah, I was just thinking that this pandemic has obviously been like a leveling of all, and we've all are going through this together. We're all experiencing this. I mean, that's kind of been the mantra of the times, is better together. Let's do this together. It's been kind of a mantra. So we're all at this place saying, okay, we want our kids to be educated. We want them to be fed. We want them to have opportunity in some sense. And so I think there's a sentiment of like, we all are trying to work this together. And a lot of it goes back to, and I keep reaching back to this because I think it's just so important. There's just been a really powerful ownership of relationship that has been cultivated over years. And I think of one of the learning extension centers that we have is working with the Somali Association, and just being able to be in that space that's very has had some run-ins with the church that has not been really healthy and kind of a little nervous. Like, there's just been a renewed opportunity to come in and say, look, we want to serve in whatever way we can. And some of that's through just providing best practices. And some of it right now, as we build this plane in the air, is giving money, and we're raising money to be able to invest finances into each of these learning extension centers.
Wonderful. On a really basic level, great question came in. Can you all just talk a little bit about what a Dream Center actually is? And this was a learning curve for me as well. We are familiar, my colleagues in DC, with the DC Dream Center. But honestly, until we started engaging you all, I did not even realize that there were Dream Centers in Ohio and throughout the country. So maybe Gerald or Nick, you could just speak a little bit to what that is specifically in Columbus, but also the network throughout the country and throughout the world.
Yeah, I was answering Stanley's question in the group chat. The Columbus Dream Center is one of many Dream Centers around the world. Dream Centers began in Los Angeles around 20 years ago under the leadership of Matthew Barnett. He and his father, who have a church actually that is planted in, I think it's Phoenix. They just caught God's heart for LA and the need that was presented there for the gospel, for outreach, for just really having a solution for a lot of what we know all inner cities struggle with, whether that be homelessness or drug addiction, etc. And so they took over a 15-story hospital and turned that into the very first Dream Center. Every floor represents a different demographic that is in need of support and resources, and ultimately the love of Jesus Christ. And so they serve homeless individuals, veterans, single families, those coming back into society from prison. And so the Dream Center motto is very simple: find a need and meet it, find a hurt and heal it. I'll say that again. It's find a need and meet it, find a hurt and heal it. And with a faith-based approach, just being available to whatever those pain points are in your community. And so that network is just relational. We share ideas, we share programs, we share what's working, what's not working across the world. And the Columbus Dream Center started 4 years ago with that same vision. And in Columbus, we are primarily meeting the needs of at-risk youth and their families, those experiencing homelessness. We have an anti-human trafficking arm of our ministry, and a few other things, meeting, again, practical needs and spiritual needs in our community.
Wonderful. Thank you for answering that. Someone has asked about the connection between First Amendment voice and this panel. So maybe I should just answer that briefly, but then I want to pose a question to you, and maybe Nick, you can take it, about kind of how you understand religious freedom being kind of a bedrock of your work, even though your work is very focused on service. So First Amendment Voice is the convener of this panel today. First Amendment Voice is an organization that's been around for about 5 years that supports and promotes values related to the First Amendment in all of its expressions, but we are specifically focused here on freedom of religion, and not just necessarily the freedom of religion that you think about once it gets to the courtroom or the court of public opinion, but we're really focused on here, and kind of focusing on Nick and Gerald's work embodying religious freedom and the freedom to serve upstream of those things in this proactive incarnational way that our gospel calls us to in terms of lived religious freedom. I hope that answered that question. So turning maybe to Nick. Nick, do you want to just talk about a little bit how you guys might think about the work you're doing as an embodied example of religious freedom?
Yeah, I mean, the work we do is just so far and wide, and we're going deeper with that too. And so, I mean, one big project that we worked on, especially through the virus, and sort of that the light of that, is just like how do churches engage in this as they begin to gather, and what does that look like? And so, working with our government leaders to try to advocate for churches and their serving and meeting, or and wisdom and kind of all of these things. So there's been a lot of unique opportunity to not impose what the church on people or impose the gospel, but to be able to bring it to the public square in a way that is honoring of Christ, and that's wise, and that's joyful to our city. And so, we're I think Gerald used this term, like just really unearthing all the things that God is doing all across the city in churches and in parachurch work. And so really that's all we're doing, is just kind of lifting that kind of stuff up.
Thank you for that, Nick. So someone has asked if your work intersects at all with supporting veterans in your community. It may just be beyond the mission of Catalyst, but I didn't know if there were any hidden, we had not had that conversation, but it may be that your work connects in some way with supporting veterans.
Yeah, I believe Jim was referring to what I referenced in regards to the Dream Center. And so the LA Dream Center specifically is what I was talking about when it came to serving veterans. And so they offer spiritual, emotional, mental, and practical help and care for veterans. That includes housing, workforce development, discipleship, and other expressions of advocacy. Our desire in Columbus is to adopt some of the programs and services that the LA Dream Center has been providing for years. And so that's something that we know is needed in Columbus, and something that we know would be a great help.
Thank you. That's wonderful. And First Amendment Voice does a lot of work with veterans. So thank you for kind of highlighting those intersections there, Gerald. One thing I wanted to ask you both was, we are connected through our shared connections through an organization called Sacred Sector, an initiative that I've worked with that really promotes faith-based organizations fully living out their faith in areas around public policy, organizational practices, and public positioning. So given that connection, I was wondering if Gerald or Nick, you could just talk a little bit about the ways in which you're thinking about living out a faithful mission in this challenging moment in terms of public policy, whether that's public health guidance with COVID, or working with public officials in the Ohio Faith-Based Initiative.
Yeah,
and I see both of you, so either of you take it. Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, just as an example, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, but one of the roles I played over the last 6 months was working with Governor DeWine from Ohio to essentially hear, and Governor DeWine has been really consistent and helpful and understanding the First Amendment as it applies to churches. And so one of the things that we've just done is put up a group in front of him of churches across Ohio and leaders across Ohio that is able to both communicate to him what work that is happening to serve the community and meet some of those emotional and spiritual needs, but also hear from him in ways that we can continue to be wise in matters of medical practices and safe distancing, these kinds of things that we all know now. And so we worked really closely with them. And then sort of at the same, almost in the same breath, you know, I've spent time with our mayor in the city and talking through issues of race and racial reconciliation and race in the church and kind of how the church can be first responders in that. And I think in many ways, both of those leaders have really seen or looked at the church in some ways and asked how can you lead, or what can you do to see these issues be addressed more holistically. And I think this is an opportunity for us as Christians who want to, you know, serve through a pandemic and want to engage in racial reconciliation. This is an opportunity for us to take a lead in that. And I think those relationships have actually inspired me personally and our team to say, okay, let's take some leadership in some of these areas, and not with a sledgehammer of trying to push our way in or feel like we're owed that as Christians, but as humble learners and wanting to work alongside. And I think those kinds of that kind of posture really goes a lot farther in being able to serve the city than maybe previous conversations or previous foundations, which have been sort of there's just been rocky, a lot of tension, and seeing maybe that sacred and secular divide a lot more. And we've really tried to be really faithful to say, no, we are gospel Jesus believing Christians, Bible believing Christians who really deeply want to address these issues that our world is longing to have answers for.
Yeah. All I would add to that is I think we're in a position to really help reframe and reorient people to what it looks like to serve God within the context of influence that he's given us. And so, you know, for a lot of people, if you're a preacher, if you're a worship leader, then you're called to ministry. But the reality is we're all a kingdom of priests, and we're given responsibility to man whatever gate of, you know, the city that we are in unto the Lord. And so David, I think, is a perfect example of someone who knew his identity as a worshiper to the Lord, but that looked like being a politician as well. That looked like being an entrepreneur. That looked like being a warrior. And so I think helping people find their identity in Christ through whatever vocation they've been called to, and in a way that helps them see their work as worship, is something that we're dedicated to. And that includes politicians. That includes those that have been called to represent the kingdom of God in a manner of helping to put legislation and policies, you know, together that are in line with biblical values and that we know will be beneficial to society as a whole. And so we've seen what that can look like on a level that I believe is just the beginning of what Columbus is about to experience. And it's really exciting.
Thank you both for sharing that. I've been thinking a lot about the conversations I've been having within Sacred Sector. And we've heard from so many ministries that are serving parents and children in some way in this challenging time. And so many of them are sharing that they have parents that are saying, I don't know what to do. I have to choose between working and having my children have a safe place to be. I don't know how I'm going to feed my children. My children are spiritually starving. I am spiritually starving, right? So I wonder if, I know you've only been open for a few days, but I wonder if you've already had any kind of praiseworthy moments where you've seen that immediate impact or stories of impact in terms of parents or families or even churches that have found these opportunities to engage across difference to be really life-giving.
Yeah, one story that comes to mind is when we opened on Monday, there was an elementary student who comes into the LEC, and there was a very clear need that this student had, and the overwhelming, nature of this season was just written all over the parent's face. And as we started to have dialogue and sat down with this student, we come to find out that that student had not even logged on to any of their online classes up to that point. And so even though school started a week ago, their first day of school was Monday because they needed help. Their parents needed help, even making sure that that student knew how to get onto their online, class and to their online platform. And just the peace that came over the parent, that this was no longer just something that they were having to figure out on their own, and that they were, essentially in a position to do by themselves, was so overwhelming to see in the best way. And we know that there's going to be many more stories like that as we move forward. Even before the LEC started, I referenced some of the organizations that we were able to immediately partner with, like Youth for Christ and Young Life and Fellowship of Christian Athletes. These organizations are faith-based organizations that have gospel-centered curriculum that they're able to present to students and to families through their relationships with the schools. And so they've made themselves available and have really stepped up and seen these LECs as places that they can continue to offer those extracurricular activities after the education part of the day is over. And so to see that be able to continue, even though the schools are shut down, to see that these programs are still going to be able to meet students where they are and share the gospel with them and their families has been one of the greatest testimonies that have come out of this LEC initiative.
And Gerald, this may be a question for you or Nick. In my preparation for this session today and for my preparation for writing a little bit about the LEC program, I was really amazed to see that there was essentially an entire resource library online for anyone that wants this, not just people directly connected in Columbus even. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about where people can go to find these resources, to find models of things like handbooks, public health guidance, compliant policies, ways to partner even with programs like the USDA to offer free lunch. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so forcolumbuskids.com is the website that I would encourage you to go to, that will have a list of resources and contact information for those that you could email today if you have questions about how to really launch an LEC in your community. There's an interactive map on that website where you can see just how we are in Columbus spreading these LECs out in a way that is truly reflective of where the greatest need is. You can get an example for how we're doing volunteer registration and student registration. You can see how we are making sure that the needs of every LEC are being made known. Some of the LECs primarily need finances. Some of the LECs primarily need volunteers. Some of them need meals, etc. And going to that website for columbuskids.com, you can see how we're structuring that and really serving the LECs in a way that's making sure that the ones that are in need are being served and getting connected to the resources that they need. And it's also going to give you just a head start in what this can look like in your community.
Great. And we have about 5 minutes before we have to wrap up with Gerald and Nick. So if the audience has, or participants have any further questions, I would encourage you to type those in now. And Gerald and Nick, I wonder if you're thinking about people sitting, and listening to this across the country, maybe their parents, maybe their churches, maybe their public policy makers. What would you really want them to know, to take home? If there's only, one piece of encouragement and maybe one piece of wisdom from your experience of pulling this together in such a quick way, what would you share?
I think one of the things that comes to my mind is I know probably a lot of people by the time they're watching this are like, wow, it's too late. It's like mid-September and it'd be impossible to pull something like this off. But I think my hope, and one of the things I've kind of shifted gears now at this point, is asking the question, how is something like this sustainable? Even if school resumes, how can we take all those resources, take all of the hopefully now connections that we have into the communities? How can we take all of that and really build a deeper community? How can congregations be way more integrated into their neighborhoods and into the families and communities around them? And so if you're listening to this now, then this might be your chance to say, okay, let me get all these resources and start thinking, how do I implement even some kind of tutoring center or some kind of CDC that can really reach and connect into the community and engage multiple churches together? Because a lot of our best learning extension centers are the ones, I think, that are run by a community of churches and not just by one. I mean, the collaboration effort has been really beautiful. And so thinking through those kinds of things and asking, okay, what can I do next, I think is probably going to do you better than saying, oh, how do I get this started now in mid-September?
Yeah, I agree with that. I was talking to someone earlier today, and Ephesians 3:20 is a verse of scripture that gets quoted all the time in many churches, that, now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than what we are able to even ask or think or ask or imagine. And although that's true, I think we have to really look at ourselves and see how much of our asking and our imagining, our asking, our dreaming plays such a part in the immeasurably more. And so if you're watching this right now, I think the question that I would pose to you, I would challenge you with, is how big can you dream? To what degree are you willing to ask God to give strategy and wisdom and help you leverage the resources that are right under your nose, the relationships, the partnerships that you already have, and what does it look like to leverage those for gospel and kingdom impact in your community, in the lives of young people and the families that need it most, and be prepared, because the Lord will respond. If you posture yourself to ask, to pray, if you posture yourself to dream and to imagine what it can look like to serve your city as the church, as in such a time as this, whether that's with the schools or whether that's with other, areas of the city, I promise you, the Spirit of God is going to respond and give you a blueprint, give you strategy, and again, show you what's already in your hands that you could leverage to make that gospel and that kingdom impact. So
thank you so much. I just really want to thank our panelists today. And, God is already putting on my heart too that, you guys are 2 days into this and you've taken the time to join us. And the verse that comes to my mind is this vision that we've been given in the New Testament, that we are called to live out the gospel, first in Judea and then in Samaria and then to the ends of the earth. And you guys are taking the time, as you are living out this program within your own community, to make it available to others. And I think it would be remiss if we just didn't thank people. I'm not sure if they're listening, but if I think about the folks in our lives, I think our collective lives, I think about Chip Wyant, and I think about Michelle Reynolds, about Stanley Carlson Feast, about Virginia Creasy, who have really created this environment today that can make this panel happen. So thank you all for joining us in this time when I don't know how God has given you the hour to be with us, but I really am grateful for your continued faithfulness beyond Columbus too, and the ways in which Columbus and our Buckeye friends are being exemplars of living out your religious freedom in a way that is faithful to your own faith, but that serves the common good. So thank you.
Thanks.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to connecting with you again soon. I believe you'll be getting the recording. Any further questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box. Our great team at First Amendment Voice, thank you to Alex and Steve and Heather, will make sure that they get back to us, and we'll try to get you any answers that you need. Thank you, everyone.